The ideal of maintaining unwavering calmness, never succumbing to anger or agitation, has become increasingly prevalent, infiltrating mindfulness applications and executive training programs alike. Often presented as a hallmark of emotional intelligence, a closer examination reveals a more complex reality. This manufactured tranquility isn't merely a neutral state. It actively shapes dynamics and doesn't always benefit the individual striving for it. In the late 1990s, James Gross at Stanford University started posting on studies on emotion regulation, with a focus on the contrast between suppression and reappraisal. Repeatedly, data showed that while suppressing anger lessened overt displays, it heightened physiological stress indicators. Subjects experienced elevated heart rates and increased cortisol levels, suggesting that their bodies reacted as though threats persisted even when unacknowledged. This finding is often presented as a health concern. Seldom noted, the same response creates an environment that values and rewards compliance. An employee who represses anger and stress becomes far simpler to manage than one who expresses these emotions openly. This ensures system stability at the employee's expense. Years later, such logic was evident during company restructuring. Middle managers at a prominent tech firm were asked to cultivate emotional resilience, while their workloads expanded and their roles blurred. These workshops, cited Gross's work, talked about mindfulness-based stress reduction and the principles of stoicism. Although complaints decreased, employee turnover remained constant as sick leave claims increased. As one engineer put it, emotionally professional and physically exhausted. That phrase seemed to summarize the situation perfectly. Calmness, here, resembled hidden distress. Conventional psychology often casts anger as a basic, primal response needing control or mitigation. It asserts that anger impairs sound judgment. The concept is not incorrect, but incomplete. Jennifer Lerner's research in the early 2000s showed that anger enhances perceptions of certainty and control, leading to faster decisions and diminished risk aversion compared to fear-filled participants. Such outcomes are usually regarded as problematic since anger can also momentarily rebalance power dynamics, signaling boundary violations. Removing anger entirely could eliminate a vital mechanism alerting an individual to transgressions. This is where the ideal of maintaining calmness faces danger, because the command to never express anger is usually aimed downward within organizational hierarchies. It appears in customer service scripts, corporate rules of conduct, and relationship guidance columns, with those holding less authority expected to remain serene. Frontline personnel are usually coached to remain composed when facing verbal attacks, while junior staff are lauded for acting professionally. In these situations, calmness is not really inner peace. It is an enforced imbalance of power, a case often mentioned in negotiation training centers on airline gate agents in the early 2000s. Following passenger confrontations, agents underwent de-escalation training emphasizing emotional neutrality. As incident reports decreased, something unexpected came to light. Although agents reported feeling less angry during interactions, they experienced greater resentment after shifts in anger directed toward family. The feeling was shifted to elsewhere. The calmness only benefited the company. It seems that if the goal is to feel no anger, then regulating emotions becomes redistributing negative emotion. Others feel better because someone else feels worse. Machiavelli's work is frequently misunderstood as encouraging emotional coldness. His real point was that visible emotion sways power dynamics. In today's world, anger becomes a data breach, and eliminating it creates vulnerability, which could train a person to distrust their own judgment. Feelings of irritation are viewed as personal failings and not as responses to situations. This makes them easier to manipulate. Experiments on learned helplessness showed that subjects exposed to uncontrollable stressors eventually stopped trying to escape. This mirrors situations involving passive aggression, unclear expectations, or social microaggressions. As such, the emotional instruction to stay calm starts to look less like self-mastery and more like conditioning. From the inside, people describe it as a dulling of experience, not peace but flatness. Mergers and acquisitions might leave project managers feeling unmotivated and unable to fight for their team. Promotions are lost. Calmness can remove someone from consideration, even without them noticing. Although the absence of anger might appear healthy, you will need to think about the larger context since anger has value. Systems that reward an absence of anger might be hiding conflict and not reducing it. Looking closely, it seems as though never get angry has value as a social instruction rather than as a personal goal. After anger is looked at as unprofessional, you need to consider who gains when someone feels like they're losing due to their emotions. This idea can be found in manuals, feedback sessions, and columns. Larissa Tydens at Stanford performed studies about how anger is viewed in different situations. One study showed that anger from high-status people made them look authoritative. When low-status individuals displayed the same emotions, that made them look incapable. Power changed how the feeling was viewed. This is why anger feels risky even before people show it. People who are lower on the hierarchy usually sense that their anger has negative results. I interviewed workers from a service company that had double call volumes. One worker felt angry when a supervisor dismissed them and then felt ashamed for having that feeling. Control was internalized before action occurred. Official psychology offers insights on emotion regulation and says things like assume positive intent or take perspective. But it seems as if such strategies are used downward. Executives can get away with anger more often than subordinates. There was a case from the 1980s involving IBM when employees were encouraged to show decisiveness, unlike other frontline employees. It was fine for higher-ups to show anger, but not for anyone else. Anger can be seen, but only when appropriate. Developmental psychologists have found that children are given different forms of feedback about how they should engage with anger. Anger gets seen as something to avoid so that the focus is shifted to the person experiencing the emotion. If anger equals weakness, then the people who cause it get advantages without acting aggressive. This can be seen in behaviors where people are rude in mild ways. The people who are targets can't justify the anger they feel. The aggressor gets to appear calm, and power shifts. This played out between partners in consulting firms. The people who acted rude were senior partners. When junior partners were frustrated, it was viewed as them not being able to act under pressure. The feeling here was not accidental. Although the claim that anger impairs thinking seems correct, studies have found that it can increase persistence, and this facet of anger rarely makes its way into the workplace. This is because employees who have goals are harder to redirect. Ordinary people can feel split. They're composed on the surface but tight internally. Over time, they can distrust themselves and feel like they have lost from the start. Much of this lies with how the system reacts rather than whether the feeling is bad. If anger were simply weakness, getting rid of it would improve outcomes. But studies on burnout show that suppressed anger can predict disengagement. Calm begins to look like compliance. Machiavelli understood that power is about which reactions people authorize. People in a system might begin to silence themselves. Realizing that anger can feel like weakness is important, and the danger is that people can feel defeated by it. In situations where calm is enforced, Adaptation can mean that a person has gotten used to something without questioning it. Some random friction might start to feel like a pattern over time, but it's often a comfortable belief to have that no one is steering things on purpose. Patterns can easily be destabilized, however. It's important to consider that there might be an error in effective forecasting. People might be too good at overreacting when uncertainty is involved and not realize how long emotions will last. The absence of clarity and not the negativity can create a strong reaction, and this is useful for a control mechanism. In negotiations, emotional displays can be used to get concessions. If one person seems unpredictable, it might be because they're trying to stabilize an interaction. This can create an asymmetry. Subordinates might register their feelings as being off balance, even if nothing overtly bad happens. They might replay conversations, though, and get into overthinking. However, all of the feeling is what might be designed. The emotions can seem related to personality or stress, but the individual issue can ignore overall patterns. Design can provide better explanations. Marketing research can show interfaces that increase engagement, such as incomplete notifications. These interfaces can cause mild irritation, which can cause people to act. This isn't manipulation, however, it's optimization. Relationship therapists might consider triggers to be unconscious, but the withdrawal that happens can make people more emotional as a way of confirming imbalances of power. These situations can be accidental and seem like the person targeted is the problem. This is asymmetrical because the person who triggers retains deniability, and the other person has to be more careful with how they express themselves. Emotional intelligence training might misfire and can harden a system because people get better at swallowing triggers instead of discovering sources. I saw a manager arrive late to meetings and change priorities a lot. When team members had a problem with it, the manager just called it thinking out loud. If triggers aren't accidents, then controlling yourself is not a liberation. It can come off as complying with what is quietly asked of you. Being unbothered can be more of a sign that someone is used to not questioning what they are asked to do. If emotional triggers are engineered and reacting can weaken positions, silence and restraint can then be tools for pressure. If triggers are engineered, then reactions are not just emotional leakage. They are pieces of data, and moments of reaction can allow for shifts in power. Emotional displays are seen as signals of lower rank. Reaction can signal the need to be urgent. There might be instances when one can act authentically to build trust, but authenticity is often disclosure, and official psychology can consider this vulnerability. There's something subtle but humiliating about this. An employee might challenge a high-level decision and get labeled as difficult even if their performance is good. Humans detect patterns, and when something reacts, the people observing learn what pressure works to use on that person. This applies to relationships as well. The predictable partner will become easier to control. Online environments have shown that outrageous acts attract more outrage, so it helps to not react. The problem has become the person as a personal failure. People are pressured to do better with how they manage emotions and might not be told that emotional reactions already give ground to another person. There's a contradiction here. Suppressing emotion can seem like strength or fear. With restrained power, one can become background noise. Employees who show signs of protest will be disciplined. It's important to delay responses and to not be readable. Management cannot map them. Emotional control isn't about internal peace, but about denying information to others. People can tell you what your priorities are, and then those can get used against you. It turns out that emotions are tactical, even if that is not the intention. The question that comes up then is, how do you exert influence without showing your hand? Once it's realized that silence can get misread as consent, there's a split but also strategic calm. The system will respond to both of these situations. Moral comfort helps to reach for good regulation. Situations can be reinterpreted to reduce the impact, and stress will decrease. In competitive environments, reframing situations without adjustments can turn you into a person who is nice but doesn't have much influence. Strategic calm looks about the same, but it's about not feeding into an environment. The feeling might be active, but it doesn't leak. Camera showed that people who use evaluation without displaying real signals can outperform other people. Moral language can make this a problem. Those who show composure are praised, but they also get passed over for important roles. Calm gets seen as a person needing a lack of edge. From the inside, moral comfort feels good, but strategic comfort feels colder. This is why most people don't choose it. There's an experiment that shows that rejecting offers is a morally angry decision that gives someone a sense of satisfaction. Changing interaction patterns, however, can lead to tangible gains. This distinction matters in hierarchies. Consider whistleblowers versus those who are privately resistant. Calm deviation is hard to classify, but open anger is punishable. Couples therapists might encourage partners to stay calm, but partners who adjust privately are able to regain leverage. Official psychology might not discuss whether keeping calm might mean that one distributes power or freezes it. There was a manager who was widely admired. However, many missed that he was making decisions about them elsewhere without discussion. That makes sense because moral comfort usually benefits the system more than the individual. If calmness is used too long, it can erode clarity. It can become hard at a point to distinguish restraint from dissociation. The point then is to not just consider calmness as good or bad, but to consider how and at what level it is being used. The final tension for all of this is whether emotional independence is really just another form of control. If moral calmness can turn into disappearance, cold detachment can go further and convert distance into leverage. Detachment can be used as a weapon. You might see that someone is being ignored, which could trigger a physiological response as the person gets destabilized. Absence and silence could do a lot of damage. Organizations might cool someone out instead of giving them a formal punishment, so people get excluded and decisions are made without checking with them. It creates anxiety in others, and detachment preserves stillness at the center. This contradicts what people know about emotional distance. Distance makes it so that less energy is spent. The imbalance ends up compounding over time. Avoidant people can have more control with relationships, while anxious partners might get manipulated. The calmness of an avoidant partner, then, can be positional. Profiles about high-level executives can highlight their emotional coolness. Detached people can push for controversial things to be passed, and it is hard to trust those people or talk to them. You can increase compliance with things, but those outcomes are rarely looked at together. From the inside, you could get a nod, but no other indication, and the lack of response becomes louder than the real response. Psychology might excuse the behavior as boundary setting, but there might also be intent to go after and be aggressive towards others. High performers are often targeted. There's also an angle that cold detachment can lead to harm without harm being accountable. People struggle to describe what happens, and HR tends to be less likely to uphold situations when they are related to detachment instead of aggression. Disengaged partners can lead to problems, and although therapists might urge reconnection, detachment can achieve the effect it wants more strategically. Detached individuals can claim neutrality, and the narrative becomes the other person's problem. Control quietly shifts. I saw in a campaign the same method happen, with leaders getting praise simply because they would not react. It wasn't dignity, but just strategy. However, there's often a price that doesn't surface. Detachment erodes feedback loops. Leaders lose situational awareness. This weapon can be a double-edged sword, as you have to cut people off to maintain a position and might not know what's really happening. People who have mastered detachment can feel a sense of isolation and can feel removed from what they control. Detachment is a trade. It doesn't require vulnerability immediately, but might require it at a later point. All emotions stop going back to you. If anger could reveal you, reaction could cost you. Calmness might freeze you, and detachment might grant power. Then what does it mean to have true emotional independence? Is it that you're not free from influence, or are you just exerting yourself without being seen? Cold detachment promises that you can't get touched or manipulated. However, you might have to pay a hidden price later that is often a threat and is not always reversible. People with power can have a lower sensitivity to emotion and can misread situations while feeling sure about their judgments. Executives were calm during corporate collapses, but things that might have been warnings seemed to not register. Detachment here filtered out feelings along with reality. From the inside, it might feel good to be untouchable and to not get into any drama. Information will still flow, but there might be problems. The lack of facts can create more problems. Relationships can also be hard for detached partners, as they experience less stress, but lead to there being less trust. While some call that a healthy boundary, it can easily turn into a wall, and those systems decay. It can accelerate the closure of closeness. Being untouchable can change how others coordinate with you. Since there is no response, people form an undercurrent. Though the resistance doesn't go away, the control is often mistaken for the calm. This also creates a personal cost, as people can feel flattened. It can become hard to differentiate good feelings from bad feelings, and sometimes it is praised. There could be a blurry path between adaptation and a feeling of impairment. A consultant might pride himself on being unrattled, but stop getting invited as a part of solving problems. Since he has been untouchable, he has also been out of the loop. The power requires the distance from the perception, but that detachment also leaves one easily manipulated through oversight. The price of non-action is epistemic loss. People have less incentive to correct you. You can remove emotional impact, but you won't always be able to remove the consequences people have. The world stops telling you how to act. If taking away every emotion buys you control, is it a way to stay untouched without staying blind? If shutting emotions down makes you blind, and indulging leads to predictability, anger can be used to steer things elsewhere and can lead to control being used elsewhere. It's tempting to think that the problem is the person being angry. However, it's really the person who gets compromised when using anger through a lack of power. They are going to be less accurate. What was disturbing previously has been shown to be stable, and emotions can simplify the world. New info doesn't update the model. Organizations can learn to get around it. They might avoid using something that provokes anger. This keeps the person's authority safe, even if it sacrifices their influence. Emotional intelligence tries to provide expression, but does not say the right way to contain strategic material. This is because people can exploit the patterns easily. The better answer is not complete suppression, since emotion does not disappear, but goes underground. The better answer is to have a better architecture, where anger can inform action when needed. This means the system is not one where the anger is completely absent. The system is more manipulated as it is named. However, anger needs to be acknowledged and bracketed. A feeling might be active, but then you don't have to follow it immediately. Temporally, you get to choose when to act. You can then encode the anger so people can respond to substance. It can be unsettling working for someone who never erupts in anger. You can't easily predict them or use strategies properly. This creates new imbalances. Without feedback and easy equalizing power through emotions, signals will go away. Uncertainty is more difficult than rage. Suppressing a lot of emotion can deplete resources, while those who build systems report feeling less fatigue. In terms of creating those systems, there are better rules related to scheduling with written aspects involved. This isn't related to emotional health, but operational stability. People around you might feel that you're harder to read or that there might be no immediacy. Not all relationships survive this. From an influence of people perspective, the system performs better. Other people can't easily bait you, and the anger gets sharpened. The problem remains that it can turn into resentment, or the unreadability can turn into alienation. The system can work well until it doesn't. If anger doesn't control you, something else must. It might be hard to tell if that's detachment or strategy and whether it's right or wrong.